The night sky above Mars glowed with the soft light of distant stars. Commander Elaine Winters stood alone on the observation deck of Installation M7, watching Earth rise over the red horizon. Her uniform, once crisp and formal, now felt like an old costume worn for a play no one watched anymore. For 200 years, humanity had lived in peace. The great war fleets that once ruled the stars were now museum pieces. The weapons that had made humans feared throughout the galaxy lay dormant in sealed vaults. Elaine's job as commander of the last active military base was mostly for show, a nod to history rather than necessity. "Another quiet night, Commander?" asked Lieutenant Ben Garcia as he entered the deck with 2 cups of coffee. Elaine took the offered cup with a grateful nod. "Just like the last 1,000 before it, Ben. My grandfather used to tell stories about when these installations were fully staffed. 3,000 soldiers, not 30. Your grandfather actually served during active times?" Elaine raised an eyebrow. Few people alive could claim direct family connections to the war era. He was just a kid when the last conflicts ended, but he remembered the parades, the massive ships in orbit. Ben leaned against the railing. "Hard to imagine we were once so ready for war." Elaine sipped her coffee. After pushing back the Vorn Collective and ending the border disputes with the Centrians, there wasn't much need for warriors anymore. Humanity made its point rather clearly. What she didn't say was what every military historian knew. Humanity hadn't just won those wars. They had dominated so completely that no species had dared raise arms against them since. Human military technology had advanced at a frightening pace during those conflicts, developing weapons that could tear apart stars and armor that could withstand the collapse of space-time itself. And then, having proven themselves the undisputed masters of war, humans simply stopped. They dismantled most of their fleets, sealed away their deadliest technologies, and turned their creative energy to art, music, philosophy, and the exploration of inner space. The great habitat rings around Earth now housed billions who had never known violence, who created rather than destroyed. The comm panel on Elaine's wrist beeped, interrupting her thoughts. "Monthly systems check is starting, Commander," came the voice of Systems Officer Paula Reed. "Standard procedure." "I'll be right there," Elaine replied. Ben smiled. Another exciting day at Installation M7. They both knew the routine. Once a month, they ran diagnostics on systems that had functioned perfectly for centuries. They checked weapons that would never fire and shields that would never be raised. It was tradition, nothing more. 3 billion kilometers away, at the edge of human territory, Frank Donovan walked through fields of golden wheat that stretched toward the artificial horizon. Jupiter Colony 9, built on the terraformed moon of Callisto, was one of humanity's most distant outposts. The massive agricultural complex provided food for the inner worlds and acted as an unofficial boundary marker. Frank enjoyed the simple life here. As colony supervisor, his days consisted mostly of checking harvest schedules and making sure the atmospheric regulators kept the growing conditions optimal. Today, he was showing his 10-year-old daughter Kelly the ripening fields. "Will I get to visit Earth someday, Dad?" Kelly asked, running her hands through the tall stalks. "Of course, sweetie, when you're older. The trip takes 3 weeks, but it's worth it. The habitat rings are beautiful. Parks and cities suspended in space with Earth hanging blue and green below." Kelly stopped suddenly, pointing up. "Dad." "What's that?" Frank followed her gaze. Through the transparent ceiling of the agricultural dome, a bright flash lit up the space beyond Jupiter. At first he thought it might be a solar flare, but Jupiter should have blocked any flares from this angle. His wrist comm chirped urgently. "Supervisor Donovan, please report to control immediately." Frank felt a chill. The colony's operators never used that tone. "Kelly, go find your mother at the community center. I need to check something." He jogged toward the administration dome, passing other colonists who had also noticed the flash. Inside control, a scene of controlled chaos greeted him. "Status report," he demanded. Operations Chief Mia Wilson looked up from her console, face pale. "Long-range sensors picked up an anomaly about 20 minutes ago. We thought it was an instrument error until visual confirmation came through. She pulled up the main display. The image showed a cluster of objects moving in formation, approaching from beyond the heliopause, the boundary where the sun's influence ended and true interstellar space began. Ships? Frank asked, though he already knew the answer. Yes. Not ours, not matching any known design. Mia's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. We've sent alerts to Earth and Mars, but given the communication delay, no one in the room needed to hear the rest. Help, if it came, would take days to arrive. How many? Frank asked. Initial count shows 67 large vessels and hundreds of smaller ones. She hesitated. They're not responding to standard greeting protocols. For generations, humanity had known only peace among the stars. The young people in the room had never imagined this scenario outside of historical simulations. Frank, at 58, was one of the few who had even basic emergency training. Begin evacuation procedures, he ordered. Priority on children and essential personnel. Use the deep space shuttles. They're faster than the regular transports. As the team jumped into action, Frank studied the approaching fleet. The ships moved with perfect coordination, their hulls seeming to shimmer and pulse like living things rather than machines. Something about their organic appearance struck him as deeply wrong. The main communication array chimed. Incoming transmission, announced Mia. The room fell silent as she activated the receiver. For several seconds they heard nothing but a strange, rhythmic pulsing. Then came sounds that might have been words, but in no language any human had ever heard, clicking and whistling overlaid with deep rumbles that made the console vibrate. Run it through all translation matrices, Frank ordered. Mia worked quickly. No match found in any database. The strange transmission continued for 30 more seconds, then cut off abruptly. In the silence that followed, the tracking display updated. They've changed course, Mia said quietly. They're heading directly for us, increasing speed. Frank felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. 3,000 colonists, including his family, were under his care. And they were about to face something humanity hadn't dealt with in centuries, an unknown, potentially hostile force. Send everything we have to Earth Command. All sensor data, the transmission recording, visual feeds. He straightened his shoulders. And initiate Defense Protocol 1. Several younger staff members looked confused. Defense Protocol 1 was something they knew only from training manuals, never implemented in their lifetime. As alarms began to sound throughout the colony, Frank watched the approaching fleet on the display. Humanity had slept peacefully for too long, he thought. Someone had just knocked on their door, and from the look of things, they weren't here to make friends. The evacuation alarms echoed through Callisto Colony as people rushed to the transport bays. Frank Donovan directed the flow of colonists, checking names against the manifest on his tablet. His wife Susan had taken Kelly to Shuttle Bay 3, but Frank stayed behind with the defense team. How much time do we have? He asked Mia, who hadn't left her post at the sensor controls. 30 minutes, maybe less. She looked up, eyes wide. The main ship just accelerated. It's huge, Frank. Our sensors estimate it's nearly 15 kilometers long. Frank tried to imagine such a vessel. Humanity had once built large ships during the war era, but nothing of that scale. He watched as the first evacuation shuttles launched, carrying the colony's children to safety. Any response from Earth Command? Mia shook her head. Still waiting. Lightspeed communications take time. Time they didn't have. Frank made a decision. I'm staying behind with the volunteer team. We need to gather intelligence on these visitors. That's not protocol, Mia protested. Protocol assumes relief forces will arrive. They won't get here in time. Frank's voice was grim. If these are hostile entities, Earth needs to know what they're facing. The colony shook suddenly, dust falling from the ceiling panels. They're here, Mia whispered. On the view screen, the alien fleet had arrived much faster than predicted. The ships moved in perfect formation, surrounding the moon. Their hulls shifted color like oil on water. making them hard to focus on. "Launch all remaining evacuation shuttles now," Frank ordered. Before anyone could respond, a blinding flash lit up the command center. When Frank's vision cleared, the orbital station that regulated Callisto's artificial atmosphere was gone, vaporized without warning. "No communication attempt, no demands," Frank said quietly. "They just destroyed it." The remaining evacuation shuttles launched in a desperate rush. Some of the alien vessels moved to intercept them, but then oddly veered away, as if something else had caught their attention. "They're landing," Mia reported, voice shaking. "Multiple vessels touching down in sectors 4 through 7. Frank addressed the skeleton crew that remained. "Anyone who wants to leave, go now. Last shuttle departs in 5 minutes." Most left, but Mia and 3 others stayed. "I'm seeing what these things want," she said firmly. Frank nodded gratefully. They sealed the command center and activated the external cameras. What they saw chilled them to the bone. The aliens were unlike anything in humanity's records. Tall, segmented creatures moved with unnatural grace, their limbs bending in impossible ways. They carried no visible weapons, yet where they walked, the colony's structures melted away. "They're taking samples," observed Alan Kane, the colonial biologist who had stayed behind. "Look, they're collecting soil, plants, even building materials." Frank watched as one creature approached a storehouse. It extended a limb that separated into dozens of smaller tendrils. These tendrils penetrated the building's walls like they were made of water. Minutes later, the entire structure collapsed inward, as if its very substance had been extracted. "They're not destroying," Frank realized. "They're harvesting." On Mars, Commander Elaine Winters received the emergency transmission from Callisto. The peaceful routine of Installation M7 shattered as ancient protocols suddenly activated. "This can't be right," Lieutenant Garcia said, staring at the console that hadn't shown anything interesting in decades. "The automatic defense network is coming online." Elaine watched in disbelief as systems she didn't even know existed began powering up throughout the installation. Hidden doors slid open in walls that had seemed solid. Lights flickered on in chambers that had been sealed for centuries. "We're receiving a direct communication from Earth Command," said Paula Reed. "Priority Alpha. They're using the old military channels." The face that appeared on the main screen was unfamiliar. An older woman with steel gray hair and the insignia of the Earth Council. "Commander Winters, I am Counselor Diane Edwards. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. Your installation is not merely a museum or training facility. It is a fully operational military command center, kept in standby mode for exactly this scenario." Elaine struggled to process this information. "Counselor, with all due respect, my crew consists of 30 people. We're historians and technicians, not combat personnel." "You won't need to be," Edwards replied. "The automated systems are designed to function with minimal human oversight. Your real job begins now, coordinating Earth's response to what appears to be the first alien incursion in 2 centuries." The screen split to show footage from Callisto. Elaine watched in horror as the alien creatures systematically took apart the colony. "What are they?" she asked. "We don't know yet," Edwards admitted. "But we've activated our emergency protocols. Dr. Natalie Powell is being brought in to access the sealed archives. There may be records of previous encounters." As if on cue, the floor beneath them hummed. Deep below the Martian surface, machinery that had slept for generations awakened. "You should know," Edwards continued, "that your installation houses more than just weapons and defense systems. Beneath you lies one of humanity's best-kept secrets, an automated shipyard. It's been maintaining a small but powerful fleet that no one was ever supposed to need again." In her apartment on Earth's North American habitat ring, Dr. Natalie Powell was enjoying a quiet evening when her security clearance chip, a relic from her days as a military strategist, began pulsing with an alert she'd never seen before. Minutes later, a transport arrived to rush her to the Council headquarters buried deep within the original United Nations complex in New York. "It's been a long time since anyone called me doctor," she told the security officer who escorted her through checkpoints that hadn't been active in her lifetime. The chamber she entered was filled with worried faces, council members who had never expected to deal with a crisis of this magnitude. Dr. Powell, Counselor Edwards greeted her via hologram from her position on Mars. We need your expertise on military history and alien encounters. I've been retired for 15 years, Natalie reminded them. I teach ancient history to undergraduates now. But before that, you were the leading expert on xenostrategy, Edwards countered, and you have Omega-level clearance to access the sealed archives. Natalie hadn't heard that term in decades. Omega clearance was for information too dangerous or destabilizing for public knowledge. Show me what we're dealing with, she said. As the Callisto footage played, Natalie's historian's mind cataloged details. The aliens' movement patterns, their harvesting behavior, the strange pulsating quality of their ships, all seemed vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place why. I need access to the deep archives, she said. There's something about these entities that rings a bell, but the reference must be in the sealed records. Counselor Edwards nodded. You'll have everything you need. Humanity has slept peacefully. For too long, Dr. Powell. It's time to remember how to fight. Deep beneath New York, Dr. Natalie Powell sat alone in the sealed archives. The room was cold, lit by harsh white lights that highlighted the dust floating in the air. No one had entered this place in generations. The computer terminal before her hummed as it processed her security clearance. Access granted to Omega files, the system announced. Welcome back, Dr. Powell. Natalie's fingers moved across the keyboard, searching for any record of creatures like those attacking Callisto. Hours passed as she dug through classified reports from humanity's early expansion era. Finally, she found something. A report filed 230 years ago by a Captain Samuel Wright of the exploration vessel Aurora. The images made her breath catch. The same segmented bodies, the same impossible movements, the same harvesting behavior. Computer, display full report. On the Helios incident, she commanded. The screen filled with data. The Aurora had encountered a single ship of these entities at the edge of the Helios system. Captain Wright described watching helplessly as the creatures harvested an entire research outpost on Pluto's moon Charon, extracting all resources and leaving nothing but dust. But what happened next made Natalie's blood run cold. The Aurora had not been alone. It was escorted by a military vessel called the Vanguard, commanded by Admiral Gregory Diaz. The Vanguard had engaged the alien ship using experimental weapons technology. The alien vessel was destroyed, but not before sending some kind of signal toward deep space. Admiral Diaz's report concluded, these entities represent an existential threat to humanity. They appear to be scouts for a larger force. Recommend immediate development of Project Prometheus as our only viable defense option. Natalie searched for more information on Project Prometheus, but found only heavily redacted files. One thing was clear. Whatever it was, the project had been successful enough that humanity had defeated these creatures before. She opened a secure channel to Counselor Edwards. I found them. We've encountered these entities before over 2 centuries ago, and we have someone who fought them, Admiral Gregory Diaz. Edwards looked confused. Diaz would be well over 250 years old by now. Check the contingency protocols, Natalie urged. Look for something called the Sleeping Sentinel program. On Mars, Commander Winters followed the increasingly detailed automated instructions appearing on her screen. The installation was transforming around her and her crew, revealing its true nature. Commander, you need to see this, called Lieutenant Garcia from a doorway that hadn't existed yesterday. Elaine followed him down a corridor that sloped deep into the Martian crust. The passage ended at a viewing platform overlooking an enormous cavern. Below them stretched a vast shipyard where robotic systems were bringing dormant vessels back to life. The ships were unlike anything in the current human fleet. Sleeker, deadlier, their hulls shimmering with technology she didn't recognize. How? Is this possible? She whispered. How could something this massive remain hidden for centuries? Her wrist comm chimed. Commander Winters, came Counselor Edwards' voice. Proceed to level B7. There's someone you need to meet. Level B7 turned out to be a medical facility deeper still beneath the surface. As the elevator doors opened, Elaine saw a team of medical technicians surrounding a cryostasis pod. The pod was opening, releasing clouds of freezing vapor. "Commander," Edward said, entering behind her. "Meet the last human to command in actual combat, Admiral Gregory Diaz." The man emerging from the pod looked to be in his 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. He coughed, adjusting to breathing normal air again. "How long?" were his first words. 230 years, Admiral," Edwards answered. Diaz nodded, as if this was exactly what he had expected. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the technology, the uniforms, the faces watching him in awe. "They've returned, haven't they? The Harbingers." Back on Callisto, Frank Donovan and his small team had retreated to an underground maintenance tunnel. Through portable sensors, they continued to observe the aliens, now known as Harbingers. "They've completely stripped sectors 4 through 12, Mia reported. "Nothing left but bare rock." Frank studied the sensor readings. "They're extracting something specific, not just random resources." Alan Kane, the biologist, pointed to his tablet. "It's the terraforming elements. They're taking everything we used to make this moon habitable, the atmospheric processors, the soil enrichers, even the water reclamation systems." "But why?" asked Mia. "Because they're terraformers too," Frank realized. "But they don't build, they harvest what others have built. It's faster, more efficient from their perspective." A distant rumbling shook dust from the tunnel ceiling. "They found the colony's main power core," Kane said grimly. Frank made a decision. "We've gathered enough intel. Time to go." They had kept one small shuttle hidden in an emergency launch bay. As they made their way toward it, moving carefully, through maintenance tunnels, Frank caught glimpses of the Harbingers' work through ventilation shafts. Where once stood thriving wheat fields now lay bare, lifeless ground. The agricultural domes were being methodically dismantled, their materials sorted and transported to the alien ships. Most disturbing was the silence. No alarms, no sounds of destruction. Just the quiet, efficient dismantling of everything humans had built. They reached the hidden bay and boarded the shuttle. As Frank prepared for launch, he looked at the small team that had risked everything to gather this information. "What we've learned might save lives," he told them. "Earth needs to know what these things can do." The shuttle lifted off using the moon's remaining mass as cover. Through the viewport they watched as Callisto, once a triumph of human terraforming, was reduced to a hollow shell. Dr. Powell arrived on Mars just as Admiral Diaz was being briefed on 2 centuries of human history. She entered the command center, now fully activated and humming with energy. "Admiral," she said, extending her hand, "I've read everything in the archives about your encounter with the Harbingers." Diaz shook her hand firmly. "Then you know we're facing an enemy that nearly defeated us when we were at the height of our military power. Now humanity has been at peace for generations. Are your people ready to become warriors again, Doctor?" Before she could answer, alarms sounded throughout the facility. Commander Winters rushed to a console. "Multiple Harbinger ships have crossed Jupiter's orbit," she reported. "They're heading directly for Mars and Earth." "How much time do we have?" Diaz asked. "At their current speed, 4 days until they reach Mars, 6 to Earth." Diaz straightened, the last commander of humanity's war era now tasked with defending a civilization that had forgotten how to fight. "Then we have 4 days to remember who we once were," he said. "Dr. Powell, I need everything you found on Project Prometheus. Commander Winters, it's time to wake up those ships you showed me." He walked to the main tactical display, studying the approaching Harbinger fleet with the eyes of a man who had faced them before. "Humanity slept like war gods for too long," he said quietly. "Now someone has knocked too loud, and they're about to meet the gods fully awake." The Mars installation buzzed with activity. In just 3 days, Admiral Diaz had transformed the sleepy outpost into a war headquarters. The hidden fleet was now visible in orbit, 30 ships of designs no living human had seen before. Their hulls gleamed with a strange, shifting material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Commander Winters stood beside Diaz on the command deck, watching as crews of hastily trained personnel boarded the vessels. Most were volunteers, From Mars colonies and scientific outposts, people who had never imagined becoming soldiers. Will they be ready? She asked quietly. Diaz's face remained stern. They'll have to be. The Harbinger fleet will reach us tomorrow. On the main screen, tactical displays showed the approaching enemy. 73 large vessels and hundreds of smaller ones, moving in their unsettling, perfect coordination. Doctor. Powell entered the command center, her face pale from lack of sleep. For 3 days she had worked non-stop deciphering the remaining sealed files on Project Prometheus. I found it, she announced. I know what Prometheus actually was, and why it was hidden away. She connected her tablet to the main display. Diagrams appeared showing human ships and soldiers undergoing a strange transformation. Prometheus wasn't just a weapons platform, she explained. It was a fundamental alteration of human biology and technology. It allowed our ships and soldiers to manipulate the same physics the Harbingers use. Diaz nodded grimly. I was one of the test subjects. The process changed us, made us something different. Different how? Winters asked. Powell scrolled through. More diagrams. The Harbingers can manipulate gravity and space-time. They don't just destroy, they harvest by literally folding space to extract what they want. Project Prometheus gave humans the same ability. Then why was it abandoned? Winters asked. If it was so successful, Diaz and Powell exchanged a look. Because, Diaz said slowly, those who underwent the process were changed permanently. Many felt they were no longer fully human. Some lost touch with ordinary reality entirely. After the threat was pushed back, people feared what we might become if we continued down that path. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. We don't have a choice now, Diaz continued. We need Prometheus soldiers again if we're going to stop them. The original process was crude, Powell added. I believe I can modify it to maintain more of the subject's humanity, but we need volunteers. Winters stepped forward. I volunteer. Diaz shook his head. You're needed in command, but we have others. He gestured to a young woman who had been standing quietly at the back of the room. This is Lisa Carter, a physicist from Earth's orbital labs. She's already volunteered to be our first test subject. Lisa stepped forward. Her face showed determination despite the fear in her eyes. I've studied the Harbinger's technology from the Callisto data. I believe I can help refine the process. Frank Donovan's shuttle arrived at Mars just as preparations for battle reached their peak. His small team was immediately brought to the command center, where their first-hand experience with the Harbingers was invaluable. There's something else you need to see, Frank told Admiral Diaz, pulling up sensor data from their escape. The Harbingers aren't a unified entity. When we were hiding in the tunnels, we managed to scan their command signals. He showed them readings that revealed different types of signals coming from different ships. They're a collective of species, he explained, all controlled by something at the center of their fleet, that massive ship that's 15 kilometers long. Diaz studied the data carefully. A parasite species that enslaves others to do its harvesting. That would explain a lot. Could we disrupt the control signal? Winters asked. Maybe, Frank said. But we'd need to get close to the central ship. Very close. Diaz turned to Powell and Lisa Carter. How soon can the first Prometheus enhancements be ready? 24 hours, Lisa replied. I'll be the first to undergo the procedure. Diaz looked at her with concern. You understand the risks? Once done, this can't be undone. Lisa nodded firmly. My father was on one of the outer colonies the Harbingers destroyed on their way here. I understand the stakes. The next day, the first battle began at the edge of Mars orbit. Humanity's dormant fleet, now awakened and crewed by hastily trained volunteers, engaged the front line of the Harbinger forces. The command center watched as the battle unfolded. Human ships, though, technologically advanced, struggled against the Harbinger's ability to regenerate damage and manipulate gravity to their advantage. We're slowing them down, but not stopping them, Winters reported, watching as another human vessel was torn apart by invisible forces. In a secured medical bay below, Dr. Powell completed the modified Prometheus procedure on Lisa Carter. The young physicist lay in a chamber filled with swirling, luminescent particles that seemed to pass through her body rather than around it. When the process finished, Lisa stood slowly. Her eyes now held an otherworldly shimmer, and when she moved, her body seemed to leave faint traces in the air, as if she existed in multiple places at once. "How do you feel?" Powell asked nervously. Lisa looked at her hands, which glowed with subtle energy. "Connected to everything. I can feel the space between atoms, the pull of gravity." She looked up. "I can feel the harbingers too. Their ships, their movements. It's all patterns of distorted space." Powell led her to the command center where Diaz was directing the battle. When Lisa entered, he immediately recognized what she had become. "The procedure worked," he said. Lisa walked to the tactical display, her movements oddly fluid, as if she was partially phasing through the air itself. "Your ships are fighting wrong," she said. "They're trying to use conventional weapons against beings that manipulate reality itself." She reached out and touched the display. Somehow her fingers seemed to sink into it, interacting with it on a level beyond its design. "I can show them," she said. "I can teach the pilots how to fight on the Harbinger's level." Diaz nodded. "Do it." Within an hour, Lisa had connected, remotely with the human fleet, teaching them new tactics that leveraged their ship's dormant capabilities. The tide of battle began to shift. Human vessels now moved in ways that seemed to defy physics, appearing in one location only to phase out and reappear elsewhere. "It's working," Winters said in amazement as the human fleet began to push back the Harbinger advance. But victory was short-lived. The massive central ship of the Harbinger fleet moved forward, unleashing energy patterns that twisted space itself. 3 human ships were instantly crushed as the fabric of reality around them collapsed. "We need more Prometheus soldiers," Diaz decided, "and we need a way to reach that central ship." Frank Donovan, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward. "I think I know how to do both." Frank Donovan stood before a group of 20 volunteers in the Mars installation's briefing room. Each person had agreed to undergo the modified Prometheus procedure. Among them were scientists, engineers, and a few military personnel who had maintained the installation over the years. "The central Harbinger ship is controlling the entire fleet," Frank explained, pointing to holographic images taken from Callisto. "Based on what we observed, if we can disrupt this control, the enslaved species might stop fighting. Some might even help us." Admiral Diaz nodded in agreement. "Our conventional fleet will engage the Harbingers head-on, drawing their attention. Meanwhile, a smaller team of Prometheus-enhanced soldiers will slip through their defenses and board the central ship." Dr. Powell entered the room looking exhausted but determined. "The modification chambers are ready. We can process 3 volunteers at once. The procedure takes 2 hours." Lisa Carter stood beside her, her body still occasionally leaving traces in the air when she moved quickly. "I can guide you through the transition," she told the volunteers. "It's disorienting at first, but you'll adjust." As the volunteers followed Powell to the medical bay, Commander Winters approached Frank. "You should be on an evacuation ship to Earth, not volunteering for a suicide mission." Frank shook his head. "I watched them tear apart my home. I need to see this through." The battle above Mars intensified as the human fleet fought desperately to slow the Harbinger advance. On the tactical displays, Earth had begun launching its own ships, older vessels pulled from museums and hastily retrofitted for combat. 12 hours later, Frank stood with 19 other Prometheus soldiers in the launch bay. Like Lisa, they all had the same otherworldly shimmer in their eyes, the same strange fluidity to their movements. Frank felt both more and less than human. He could sense the gravity wells of nearby planets, feel the subtle vibrations of space-time around him. Admiral Diaz addressed them one last time. "Your mission is clear. Reach the central ship, find whatever entity is controlling the collective, and sever its connection to the fleet. We don't know what you'll find in there, but the future of humanity depends on your success. They boarded 3 small, sleek vessels designed specifically for Prometheus soldiers. Unlike conventional ships, these were partly controlled by thought, responding to the enhanced neural patterns of their pilots. "Fleet command to Prometheus team," came Winter's voice over the comm as they launched. "We're opening a path for you. Good luck." The main human fleet surged forward in a coordinated attack, creating a momentary gap in the Harbinger defenses. The 3 Prometheus ships accelerated through, moving in ways that seemed impossible, phasing partially out of normal space, becoming harder for the Harbingers to track. "They recognize us," Lisa said, her voice tight with concentration as she piloted the lead ship. "They've encountered Prometheus technology before." Several Harbinger vessels broke off to intercept them, but the Prometheus ships twisted through, space in erratic patterns. Frank watched through the viewport as Lisa manipulated the ship's trajectory, not just steering, but actually bending the space around them. The massive central Harbinger ship loomed ahead, a sprawling structure that resembled a dark crystalline spiderweb spanning kilometers. Its surface pulsed with energy patterns that hurt Frank's eyes to look at directly. "There." Lisa pointed to a section that seemed to flow differently than the rest. "That's an access point." Their ships approached the massive structure, now taking fire from defense systems that warped gravity itself into weapons. One of the Prometheus ships was caught in a distortion field and crushed instantly. "Don't try to avoid the distortions," Lisa instructed urgently. "Move through them. Use your Prometheus abilities." Frank and the others focused their newly enhanced perception. He could see now how the distortion fields operated, not as solid barriers but as patterns that could be navigated if you could perceive all dimensions. The remaining 2 ships passed through the Harbinger defenses and landed on the outer surface of the central vessel. The material beneath their feet wasn't solid metal but something partly organic, pulsing with energy. "We need to reach the core," Lisa said, consulting the strange perceptions her enhanced mind was receiving. This way, they moved through the Harbinger ship, encountering various enslaved species that maintained different sections. Some fought them, while others seemed almost glad to see them, standing aside as if hoping for liberation. At the heart of the massive ship, they found what they were looking for, a vast chamber where a single entity floated in a pool of shimmering liquid. The creature was enormous, with a body that branched out in hundreds of tentacle-like appendages that connected to control interfaces throughout the chamber. "The parasite," Frank whispered. The entity turned what appeared to be a sensory cluster toward them. A voice filled their minds, not sound but direct neural impression. "Humans," it communicated. "The war gods who sleep. We remember you." Lisa stepped forward. "You've attacked our worlds, harvested our colonies. Why?" "We consume. We adapt. We absorb the works of others rather than create our own. It is efficient." The entity's mental voice was coldly logical. "Your kind drove us away centuries ago. We waited, watched, saw you dismantle your fleets, seal away your weapons, saw you become soft, philosophical, peaceful. You thought we'd forgotten how to fight," Frank realized. "A mistake," the entity acknowledged. "The sleeping gods still dream of war." Without warning, the chamber filled with distortion fields as the entity attacked. The Prometheus soldiers scattered, using their enhanced abilities to phase through solid matter and manipulate gravity in return. Lisa pushed her abilities further than anyone, creating counter-distortions that neutralized the entity's attacks. "The control nodes," she shouted. "Target the connections to the fleet." Frank and the others focused their efforts on the hundreds of tentacle-like appendages linking the parasite to its control systems. As each connection severed, they could feel the change rippling through the Harbinger fleet. Confusion, disarray, and in some cases, rebellion. The parasite fought back with increasing desperation, collapsing parts of its own ship to crush the invaders. Several Prometheus soldiers were lost, unable to phase quickly enough to escape. Frank found himself face to face with the central mass of the entity. He could feel its ancient hunger, its countless centuries of consuming other civilizations' works. You should have let us sleep, he told it, before channeling every bit of his new abilities into creating a distortion field within the parasite itself. The entity convulsed as space-time twisted inside its body. With a final mental scream of rage, it unleashed a massive energy discharge that ripped through its own vessel. "We need to go, now," Lisa shouted, grabbing Frank's arm as the chamber began to collapse. The surviving Prometheus soldiers retreated to their remaining ship, phasing through collapsing corridors and avoiding the panicking enslaved species now freed from control. As they launched away from the disintegrating central ship, they watched the Harbinger fleet fall into chaos. Some vessels turned on each other, others simply went dormant. Many began retreating back toward deep space. Lisa opened a channel to Guy, the human fleet. "Admiral Diaz, Commander Winters, we've done it. The controlling entity has been neutralized." On Mars, in the command center, cheers erupted as they watched the Harbinger fleet scatter. The immediate threat was over, though the battle had left deep scars across the solar system. Admiral Diaz looked at Commander Winters. "What happens now?" she asked him. "Do we go back to sleep? Put away our weapons again?" Diaz watched the Prometheus ship returning, carrying people who were now something more than human but who had saved humanity itself. "No," he said quietly. "We stay awake this time. The universe has more harbingers, more threats we can't yet imagine. Humanity slept like war gods for too long. Now we stand guard, so our children can dream of peace." Frank Donovan stood at the viewport as they approached Mars, his enhanced senses allowing him to see the planet in ways no normal human could. He thought of his lost home on Callisto, of the family he had saved by staying behind, of the future that now remained possible. Humanity had changed. Not just the Prometheus soldiers with their strange new abilities, but all of humanity had been forced to remember its strength. They would rebuild what was lost, heal the wounds of battle, and face the stars with open eyes. The war gods were awake, and the universe would need to knock more politely from now on.